Hi guys. So what we have open on the screen for week 14 Monday are the 4 files that you'll see in the folder. Okay. Now I'm going to walk you through 2 of these sections for this video, and then I'm going to do a secondary video in a few moments afterwards. But again, this is the week 14 that you'll see in your individual class. So one item I want to point out first, this document, this link, T.S. Eliot's Prufrock Annotations, that is going to a Google document. As soon as you open it, you'll get something that looks like this. It's important that as soon as you open it, okay, go over to the file and make a copy for yourself. Otherwise, everybody will be working off the same document. So I've shared it to the class, and you need to make a copy unique to yourself. So again, it's under File, Make a Copy. Once you do that, you'll notice that we have the full poem, every stanza, broken down into a cell of T.S. Eliot's long poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. So for this week, we're breaking down this poem through this worksheet. And there'll be a variety of information you'll be placing inside the cells for later use. There is a small paper that you'll be writing on this subject. Okay? Now, the other thing that what this comes down to, this poem is a modernist poem. It's a part of the modernist movement. So to fully understand T.S. Eliot's expectations and indications in the work, I am going to first review really quickly with you the whole modernist movement. And in this chart, you'll notice I have it broken down into these categories of different types of modernism. So basically what happened, modernism began in the 1890s. There was the last decade of the 1800s. People started to look ahead, knowing there was a new millennium on the horizon. It's the same thing that happened in the 1990s. Before you were born. People were aware that the 2000s were coming up, and they wanted to be prepared for change. They wanted to be prepared for the new culture and the new attitudes and the positive atmosphere that was capable of being generated for the new time. So that's why usually critics pick 1890. It's a whole cultural attitude adjustment, a shifting of thought. The era prior to modernism is labeled Victorianism, so I'll get to that later. But so it started up 1890s, 1900s, and it lasted till 1960. I'm going to skip down to one more cell, the second row. The poets and the fiction writers of this era, in particular, are great experimenters of experience. They want to develop a character and have you as an individual learn or understand how to better experience being another person. So they're trying to capture a pure representation of another identity. The best way they viewed it was to use the thought process of these individuals, these fictitious individuals that they were creating. So in particular, William Faulkner, one of his easiest works to take in using this genre or this era of thought would be As I Lay Dying. Each chapter is a different character discussing a similar situation, and slowly the reader discovers the plot being unraveled in front of you. Each chapter is a different person, a different stream of consciousness for an individual, and you get to learn these variety of people. The focus is centered on some characters more than others, and like, for instance, the small boy in the text who's under 5, he basically has a chapter all to himself. Just like it's a family, and each one is giving their perspectives of the mother figure who has died. And they're transporting her body from a small town to a larger town's cemetery. And that's Faulkner. So you're learning what it's like to be these various characters. Virginia Woolf did the same thing in her writings, and so does James Joyce. The stream of consciousness is a major player in the modernist movement. The other thing to keep in mind, modernism is a broad term that even today, over here in the far right-hand side of the column, we are in a modern era. So we are in the meta-modern era. This column is heavily influenced by the previous modernism of the other decades. So don't confuse the term modern with contemporary. When I use the term modern, I'm meaning modernism or postmodernism, which is from the 1960s to the year 2000, or postmodernism, which was the decade of 2000 to 2010. These later views of modernism, again, are heavily influenced by the previous beginning era. Each one is heightening and strengthening the original concepts of modernism. Primarily, what the artists are wanting to emphasize, if you see here the first bullet point, defy expectations. A writer will label their work as a sonnet or label their work as a haiku, that Japanese short verse form you learned in elementary school. Or they'll label it a novel. And then the author is going to experiment and create a wide definition according to their own unique concepts, their own individualism. And it's a very free, creative concept where the author is in more control of the end result. Tradition and culture has less of a control. The author is given almost full control. So the idea is a reader, an audience member, will not have their expectations met through the artwork. You're defying what the typical person views as creative work. As a result, what's going to happen, oftentimes, the modernist will promote fragmented imagery. So the storyline will not move from like a typical chronological concept from A to B to C to D and all the way down the alphabet. Often it's scattered. Like with the Faulkner concept, because you've got a variety of people, you're getting different perceptions of one event. So one character has a different viewpoint of the situation than the other characters. And you'll see contradictions being developed and conflicts being stressed because of these different perceptions. And therefore, it's fragmented. It's not cohesive. It's not a smooth transition from chapter to chapter to chapter. Or, as in the case of T.S. Eliot, it's not as smooth of a transition from stanza to stanza to stanza. Then you got the third bullet point, which connects with what I've already said. You're utilizing multiple perspectives or multiple angles of one scene, one object, one event. In the case of T.S. Eliot, that's what the poem is. You have the character expressing his viewpoints of his current state of social feelings, of the culture of society surrounding him, his environment, his immediate social environment. Now, the author will have no restraint placed on them. They can say whatever they need to in order to embellish and establish these characters. So sometimes the characters will be very rude, sometimes they'll be very upfront and brutally honest, they'll be blunt. You're learning what it's like to be a bigoted person. You're learning what it's like to own your prejudices and your biases. So oftentimes people will confuse the character with the author, and you got to be careful with this type of concept. The author is not the character. The author's not expressing their own unique views of the world. They're showing you unique, individualized, fictionalized other figures. Despite the lack of cohesiveness and despite the restraint of there is a harmony developed in the text. There is a creative flow, a sense of art being produced for the audience. It does require the audience to come into the piece with a strong lens already in place. So whatever lens you feel comfortable using, keep that in mind as we go through Prufrock. I will be expressing alternative viewpoints you can take according to whatever lens you have in mind. I tend to lean more towards psychological and Freudian concepts, but there are specific stanzas I bring up sociological lens and gender lens and even queer theory. Now, the creative writer will not adhere to a strong sense of traditional writing. This is all creation of a new concept. So they may take, like I said earlier, they'll take a sonnet and reinvent it and produce something that doesn't look like a sonnet. They may label it a sonnet, and it may critically be defended as a sonnet, but they're reinventing the whole concept behind what makes a sonnet a sonnet. Okay. So in that realm of thought, they are borrowing from the cultural history of the past, but again, it's to reinvent a perspective of the present moment. So in other words, what Eliot often will do, he'll take Chaucer or he'll take Shakespeare and take a scene from those two resources, or take a line, a quote from those two resources, and put it into his own unique work and shift the meaning of that line, and it becomes something new. Okay. Again, as we go through the whole process, I'll point that out to you. And oftentimes what results is a collage-like result. It's very much a collection of random thoughts that are loosely connected, and it's up to the lens that you're operating with. You can see the connections. You can build the bridges of meaning throughout the whole piece, and you'll see in that regard, you'll see a cohesiveness being created. It's not going to be instantaneous. You won't notice it right away. Excuse me. But afterwards, when you sit back and think about it, you have put together a puzzle with all these various pieces, and then you sit back and look at the full picture. Okay? You may guess this is probably my favorite form of writing. When I was a junior in high school, my teacher, Mrs. Bernacki, showed me this poem to the class, and I loved it instantly. You're learning a new way of approaching literature. It's a whole new expression of creative thought. Okay. Let's see. So that's modernism in a quick format. The items up here in the top column, in the top row of the column, I'll be going over in just a second. So don't worry about that portion. Okay. Now, so that's modernism. What is next? I want to show you an example of an early writer in modernism. This is by Ezra Pound. He is the mentor of T.S. Eliot. So Eliot was taken under the wing of Ezra Pound, and they worked together, and it's roughly about 5 years that Eliot was developing the poem, The Love Song of J.F. Prufrock. It took him forever. He was drafting and redrafting and getting other viewpoints from other people, notably Ezra Pound. Now, in this particular case, Ezra Pound, he's an extreme writer. He'll either give you very little, extremely very little, or he'll give you volumes and volumes and volumes. Okay, so as a quick way of summing up, if one could sum up Ezra Pound's work, I'm going to use this short 2-line poem. Another way of putting it, if you count the title as a line, you have 3 lines, like a Japanese haiku. So some people like to consider this title as the first line. Now, this is what one calls a majestic. You take the word image and add estic, imagestic. It's all based on images, the pictures you can piece together to create a scene. It's not necessarily looking for a cohesive, again, you're not looking for a cohesion of a plot or a story. You're looking for how these images portray a mood and how the mood communicates a message. So in particular, this really short one by Ezra Pound. In a station of the metro, the apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. Okay, so what you're going to do, you sit back after being told this situation and you let it soak in and you meditate on it and you try to come up with a secondary meaning that is personal to you on an individual level. Everybody comes across with a different reaction. That's what makes us human. In particular, the station of the metro is like the subway line in Paris. And what Ezra Pound is establishing is a connection with a industrial human city landscape and merging it with a natural phenomena. That's something you know that occurs anywhere around the world in the springtime. Okay, these are the petals that appear on trees, like what's happening right now with the pear blossoms opening up all over the place. So the metro line, okay, you have the people waiting for the train to appear, and their faces in the crowd are blurred together like an apparition. So in this case, today when I went over this, I said, what does apparition mean? Everyone said ghost. Well, the word has multiple definitions. So the top one is ghost or ghost-like, a spirit or a pale face, but it also means impression. When Pound picked that word, he's picking it because it is multi-definitional. And that means anybody who reads it can get a whole new different perspective, like I just said. And like these people with their blur of similarity, petals are all unique unto themselves, especially after a rain. And that's why the bough is wet and black. The wood is dark because of the rain. So the petals are becoming an echo or mirror of the faces in the crowd on this subway line. And as a result, you're seeing how humanity is being blurred with a spring-like reality. I like to view this as a very positive take on the human experience. Now, this is somewhat before World War I, when the war was not yet full steam ahead. So Pound was slightly optimistic. It's after World War I, and in the stages of World War II, he went a little off the edge, and some say he was bipolar. He had a mental breakdown and mental issues, and he did promote fascist ideas during the World War II era when he was living in Italy. He made anti-American speeches. So some people are trying to rescue his early works, his creative genius. He was a mad genius, from being totally erased because of his political rants that developed later in life. Be that as it may, this is one of his strong works. It's a beautiful piece for something very short. You can have a long conversation with it. You'll see, if you go to JSTOR, for example, there are many essays talking about the simplicity. There, I said it. Simplicity and minimalism of this poem. Okay. Now, okay, I'm going to end this video at this point, part one. I'm going to end right now. You've got the building blocks towards Eliot's Prufrock poem. So what's going to happen in the next video, part two, I'll be telling you what to put into the top cell of that chart of T.S. Eliot's Prufrock annotations. So when you start the second part two, be sure you have the Prufrock annotations open so you'll know what to place in those numbered lines. There's 10 items I need you to put in the category marked title. And they're short phrases to put in there. Okay? So I'll be talking to you later. Stay safe.